This is a fan-generated show. If you'd like to support us, please go to jamieglazov.com. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our new Rumble channel. All your support is greatly appreciated.
Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, claims that he was very surprised at the rate and speed with which the Taliban were able to take over Afghanistan. He might not have been so surprised if he had been paying more attention to the Taliban and less attention to white rage. Now, all of you, I'm sure, remember the moment where General Milley sat in the House and testified, "I want to understand white rage." He might have actually spent his time far better if he had actually been trying to understand Taliban rage or Muslim rage or Islamist rage. Because what was going on while Milley was reading his prepared statement in defense of embedding critical race theory in order to undermine our military? What were the Taliban doing at the time? Well, the Taliban were actually busy taking over Afghanistan. And they weren't just beginning their process of taking over Afghanistan. A week after Milley's Little House performance, Afghanistan had collected a very nice assembly of American weapons that had been transferred over to the Afghan army, including not only armored vehicles, but even American drones. In July, Milley was saying that it might actually not look so good, that the momentum might be going the Taliban's way. At the time, nobody was asking him about this because the big story in Washington, D.C., the story that everybody in the media was covering when they came to Milley, was not what was going on in Afghanistan. It was a claim in an anti-Trump book that Milley had prevented a coup. The claim, of course, most likely comes from Milley or from his associates in the first place when they were trying to burnish their credentials with the Biden administration, while, of course, smearing President Trump. Now, the massive collapse, the defeat in Afghanistan, all this was going on. Milley, and for that matter, the military brass, was focusing very heavily not on an actual war that they were tasked with dealing with. No, they were focusing on critical race theory. They were focusing on spreading claims that they'd prevented some sort of coup by President Trump. They were focused on burnishing their woke credentials rather than actually winning wars. And this is a phenomenon that I discussed in the latest booklet from the David Horowitz Freedom Center, The Soil. This booklet, which contains work by David Horowitz, it contains work by John Perazzo, but it also contains a number of profiles and articles by me discussing just what's going on with the wokening of the military. Now, a simple way to understand this is to look at your average college campus. College campuses used to turn out America's best and brightest. Now they turn out America's worst and wokest. If you want useless people, you go to the Ivy League. If you want people to actually get something done, you look at people who have not graduated from college or have dropped out from college. Now, the same process of wokening that made the college campus so toxic and so fundamentally useless when it comes to getting things done has been taking place in the military. The Soil covers the situation within a number of members of the top brass, within the Navy, within the Air Force, but it also looks at service branch academies, at the incredibly toxic situation in those service branch academies where the same radical professors that are operating on college campuses are doing the same exact thing in service branch academies. It looks at the reality of who's actually suffering from so-called systemic racism in the military. Hint, it's not the people who are at the very top. It is the young white men who are poor, who are going to be sent out to places like Afghanistan, who are given a contradictory mission and who are sold out. An incredible number of American soldiers died in Afghanistan, for the most part under Obama's watch, because they were not allowed to defend themselves. The military brass, the same generation of military brass that is now at the very top, had no problem with this. They had no problem with American soldiers dying to win the hearts and minds of Afghans. How are those hearts and minds looking now? When the Obama administration made the decision to pivot to Afghanistan, at the same time, while not allowing our men to actually fight and defend themselves, they sacrificed so many of those men. So many of those young boys came back. They're feeling defeated right now. They're feeling beaten. But so many of them had committed suicide. One of the things that I mentioned in The Soil, is that despite the claim of systemic racism, that minorities in the military are much more under stress, the fact of the matter is that the white men, particularly the white men from combat units, are killing themselves at much higher disproportionate rates than any minorities. And this is, by the way, true in civilian life, but it is very much true in the military, where suicide rates are so much higher. Now, the military brass focused on suicide rates for a while, then they switched over to systemic racism. During the Black Lives Matter riots, Milley led the way in pushing these so-called critical conversations in which Black service members were encouraged to come forward and say, we are the victims of systemic racism, we are the victims of persecution in the military, while white personnel were told that they were suffering from unconscious bias, they were suffering from white privilege, and this is still the stuff that is going on to this day within the military. Hardly a week goes by without another horrible diversity, inclusion, and equity phenomenon. I'm sorry, I got that acronym wrong. The correct acronym is not supposed to be DIE, it's supposed to be Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, but you know, Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity, or DIE, would actually be much more correct if you look at what's been going on in Afghanistan. Now, Milley's claiming that he was taken by surprise by the rate and the speed of the Taliban's advance. The truth is he was not paying attention. The Taliban advance was well underway while he was doing his little house shtick, while he was doing his press conferences, while the claims were being spread that he'd prevented some sort of coup. He wasn't taken by surprise. He chose not to pay attention because actually winning wars were no longer vital to his career. And this is the general phenomenon. I've done a number of interviews discussing the soil and discussing what's wrong with the military. Let me just sum it up quickly, very, very succinctly. The military is not focused on winning wars, it is focused on social agendas. Under Obama, there was systemic racism stuff, but it was environmentalism. How are we going to make the military participate in the environmental programs of the Obama administration? We need to have the Navy use green fuels. How's that working out? Not so well. Under the Biden administration, of course, it's all about racism. It's about systemic racism. We're going to fight racism in the military. The truth of the matter is that the military is the least racist institution in America. It is, before that word was hijacked by Ibram X. Kendi, it is anti-racist. It is an organization where white kids from the Ozarks and black kids from Oakland got together and learned to work together for a common cause, for a common country that they all shared. The people who have gone through the military know how ridiculous racism is. But the people at the top, that is another story. And the military has become a function, a vehicle for various radical leftist agendas, again, as I discussed in The Soil. These radical agendas are undermining our national security. They've diverted the military from its fundamental task of protecting the country, of defeating America's enemies. Right now we have a horrible, insane situation on the ground. This might change by the time you see it, but the Taliban have control of the roads. Their checkpoints control access to the airport. The military is in control of the airport itself, and you've got General Milley coming out there and saying, yes, he was taken by surprise, and the Taliban are not interfering with our operations. What that means is that the airport is effectively, functionally besieged. The Taliban get approval, they decide who gets to go to the airport. This is General Milley's idea of a victory. This is what he considers acceptable and functional and sustainable. And that is absolutely horrifying. It is unacceptable, yet this is the kind of situation we've created with a military that is focused on winning wars against racism, that is focused on, as the new slogan goes, protecting democracy. It is not the military's job to protect democracy. Voters protect it. America, first of all, is a constitutional republic, but when you talk about the military protecting democracy, that means the military intervening on behalf of the Democrats, which is exactly what Milley was going around and claiming and talking about preventing an insurrection, or at least leaking that he prevented some sort of insurrection. Meanwhile, the real insurrection, the very effective insurrection, was happening in Afghanistan. It was happening because Milley and so many of the military brass were all focused on what Biden thought of them, on what the Washington Post thought of them, on what their careers would look like after they retired and would get jobs and running colleges. They would get jobs in the defense industry. They'd be the heads of corporations. And Americans pay the price. American national security pay the price. America's image around the world as a military power has been badly, badly damaged, and it is going to take a lot of work to repair that damage. The repairs cannot come from the same woke generals, the woke admirals, the same people who have created this entire disastrous situation, who focused on critical race theory to the exclusion of everything else. This is what the David Horowitz Freedom Center, it's what David Horowitz, it's what John Perazzo, Mark Tapson, it's what I discuss in this booklet, The Soil, which delves into how the military has been corrupted, how it's been transformed into pursuing radical leftist agendas, including critical race theory, which is basically just updated Marxism. You've actually got American officers now on a regular basis coming forward and confessing their white privilege. You know, there were captured Americans behind enemy lines, captured Americans in Vietnam and Korea who refused to do this, who refused to repeat the horrible Marxist indoctrination that we're being told to repeat. They would have bamboo splinters shoved under their fingernails, they still would not say it. Right now there are people in the military, officers, who for their careers are willing to say this, are willing to go ahead and attack America and undermine our national security. This is part of what the soil delves into. It's worth getting. If you go to the David Harwood's Freedom Center, if you look at the sidebar, the soil is there. You can read the booklet online. You can download a PDF. You can order booklets directly from the David Harwood's Freedom Center. I believe this is a really important issue. I think we need to keep fighting it, and David Harwood's Freedom Center intends to continue fighting it. Thank you for your support, and thank you to the Glazov Gang. This has been another Daniel Greenfield moment for the Glazov Gang. I hope you continue to follow the Glazov Gang and subscribe to its YouTube channel, and continue to stay engaged on this and many other issues. Thank you.